Welcome to the Behind the Bar podcast. Today we have Vanessa joining us. If you'd like to do a little introduction, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Hey, so I'm Vanessa D'Souza. Day job, I work for T&T Sports in the commercial sports section. So I deal with pubs and clubs on an everyday basis. And by night, I am the Autistic Chef.
Oh, I didn't know you worked for T&T Sport. In my research.
Yeah. I mean, it's my first interaction with pubs and clubs.
Yeah. How long have you been there for?
I think it's like 6-7 years now. 7 years, so quite a while.
Enjoying it?
Yeah, loving it.
Always been in the pub side of it? Or?
Yes, since I've joined sport, so yeah.
So thank you for joining us today. It's really nice that we can have this catch up and just speak with you. Obviously, you mentioned the Autistic Chef. That's mainly why we'd like to talk to you. Mm-hmm. And some people will probably know you from MasterChef.
Yep.
Which was very exciting, and I'm sure for you, a bit overwhelming, exciting, so many things.
Very, very exciting, but also very, very scary. Probably the most daunting experience of my life, and I would say at some point the worst experience of my life.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience.
So how did you, obviously you said you worked for TNT, but is that was how you got into the industry, or?
I trained as a lawyer, absolutely hated it. Obviously, unbeknown to me, I was neurodivergent, so I'd never cope very well in that environment, and then ended up kind of in a niche in pubs and clubs, which started off with BT Sport and now is TNT Sports. Cooking has always been sort of my passion, and took the plunge last year and entered MasterChef. Now trying to fully sort of transition. Yeah.
What started your passion about cooking? Family or?
Actually, necessity. Being autistic, I have a lot of sensory sensitivities, and for me it meant that I needed full control, and so the best and easiest and safest way for me to do that is to cook myself. So it started off as that, and then transitioned into really enjoying it and finding a passion for it. It kind of became a special interest of mine, so a very useful one to have.
Very useful. What's your favourite thing to cook?
Oh, that's always a tough one because I'm very much a mood food kind of person.
Me too. So
it's really about how I'm feeling. So winter times, it's always something cozy, comforting. But then in the summer, I'm like the complete opposite. So I'm always sort of inclined towards bold, big flavours rather than sort of very traditional
like
French.
Blueberries in a risotto thing.
Yes.
Yeah. You said that you started off as a lawyer. At what age did you have the diagnosis and everything?
So I actually received my diagnosis age 35. So that was 3 years ago. I've just turned 38. So I've gone the majority of my life without knowing. And it's really interesting to see how that's impacted, I guess, everything from nursery to school to university to everything. And it's only now I really have post-diagnosis and understanding of why I struggled so much in so many environments. It's really a game changer now, just sort of having this knowledge so I can make informed decisions moving forward as to what is the best environment for me.
And what made you get the diagnosis? Was it something that you noticed in yourself? Did someone suggest something? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when you speak to many sort of late diagnosed, especially women, they always say the same thing, sort of, I knew something was different about me. I didn't. I just blissfully was unaware for 35 years. And it was only really when COVID hit. Obviously, I had masked so heavily. I knew I struggled in an office 9 to 5, but COVID was a game changer. Suddenly, I was at home. I was working from home. I lived on my own, and I was like, I love this. Yeah. Why are people struggling? I'm not. I'm living my best life.
Yeah.
But actually, every day, I used to do my 1 hour walk that we were allowed to do with my neighbour. And this is a neighbour I didn't really know. It was a neighbour that I used to see just putting out the bins. And he is the one that noticed all of my autistic traits. And I guess he just assumed I knew because to him it was so obvious. And then I think he kind of like casually dropped it. Oh, we can't do it this time on this day because it's a different route and you'll go mental basically because you're autistic. And I was like, no, I'm not.
Sorry,
because
what?
I had all these stereotypes of what I thought autism was. Yeah. And actually, I think I was quite offended by it until I started looking into it. And I was like, oh, gosh, how have I missed this? And I think it was about a year of just research. I think there's this misconception that people get told or think they see something on social media. They're like, oh, I have ADHD or, oh, I'm autistic. Yeah. And it's like suddenly that channels them to having a diagnosis, and it doesn't. I spent about a good year researching. and presented all the information to my GP. And unfortunately, I wasn't really taken very seriously. So about 3 attempts, nothing really happened. I was kind of told, look, you've got to this level in life without much support, so I would just continue. But my black and white thinking meant that I really needed to know, and actually not knowing was causing me a lot of sort of anxiety and issues. So I got on the waiting list for a private diagnosis, which I acknowledge I'm very privileged to be able to have. But even that took 8 months. It took 8 months on a private diagnosis. I guess maybe because of the backlog of COVID and stuff. And actually they were transitioning from doing in-person assessments to like Zoom ones. But yeah, it was a real game changer.
That's a long time. Was this all during COVID?
Yeah.
Yeah. 8 months is still a long time to wait. Well, I suppose a year and 8 months, technically, once you've done your research and everything.
It's a very long time. So, yeah.
I suppose it probably, like, did it settle, like, once you got the diagnosis, it made it a lot easier, like, oh, this explains everything.
Receiving, I guess, that piece of paper was just life-changing because it suddenly validated why I struggle.
Yep.
It provided me with answers as to, I guess, why I've lived my life and I choose to live my life in that way. And it was just really quite liberating. Unfortunately, you aren't given that piece of paper with a diagnosis and then given sort of help and, you know, any of the things that you need to do to unpick your whole life. So that is work you have to do yourself. And I will say that somebody really has to be ready for a diagnosis because it can send you into quite a headspace of just difficulty, I would say, because it's almost like you have a midlife crisis because you don't know who you are at that point. You're just like, I thought I knew who I was, but actually, is this just the masked Vanessa? So I've spent the last 3 years, and I can honestly say I'm still not there. I still haven't unpicked who I really am, but I am really trying very hard to just make every day an authentic experience.
And has it affected, like, with your family or anything? How have they been supportive? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, well, it's always genetic, isn't it? So it's so obvious to me. And actually it came up because the diagnosis process is actually quite extensive, where your parents have to fill out loads of information about your childhood. And it was quite apparent in a lot of that information that they are both neurodivergent themselves. And so I guess that's why it wasn't picked up, because they themselves think this is very normal behaviour.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they don't put themselves in situations that are uncomfortable to them. So a lot of my childhood, they wouldn't do things that they didn't want to do. So therefore, I wouldn't then experience those things that would typically send me into a meltdown. So like kids' parties, they didn't want to do. So
most parents don't want to do this.
Yeah. So I find it fascinating, but I think from a cultural point of view, I think being from the Asian community, it's always still a bit of a taboo subject. And so my parents are like, cool, you can be autistic, you can have ADHD, but like, why are you telling people this?
Don't shout about it.
Yeah. So there was a bit of friction actually when I told them, you know, I'm going to be on MasterChef, and actually I think I'm going to be open about it because it feels really inauthentic to me to go on a TV show and pretend that I'm okay with my rice touching my curry, because I'm definitely not. And whilst I'm not eating it, and I could go on and just be like, look, this is what it all is, and I don't have to deal with the consequences of those foods touching, I knew it would be very inauthentic because the people that know me well would know I would have an absolute meltdown over those textures. So I chose to be open, and I'm not sure my parents really, really like that. But actually, when they saw the reception to it, I think they're starting to move their opinions a little bit and be a bit more open-minded.
It is definitely something that is more spoken about now. I think if you did that 5 years ago, it would be a whole different story.
100%. And actually, weirdly, 4 or 5 years ago when I was kind of trying to research into do I think I'm autistic, there just wasn't this wealth of information that you have on social media where people are being really honest about their experiences. And so I really struggled even thinking, am I or am I not? Because you're still relying on very outdated information from Google, basically.
No. And with the social media side, I was going to say stalked your social media. That's not the right words, but I've seen your social media, and you do a lot on that about it. Have you had much backlash? Have you had many different think, how do people receive it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm quite lucky because I'd say 90% of it is really, really positive. And actually, it's really amazing to see how parents and caregivers, maybe of other neurodivergent kids, are just finding the content so helpful because, you know, especially if your child is non-speaking, it's often so difficult to kind of understand, if you're not neurodivergent yourself, what they're thinking, why they are experiencing the world in that way, why they're potentially having a meltdown over something that somebody else might deem to be so everyday.
Yeah.
And me just kind of explaining, this is why I have an issue when it rains. You know, this is the sensory problem that I have when I go outside and it's the cold wind, the wet rain. It's horrible. And parents are finding that really, really helpful. I think me talking about my issues with food. And
food is a huge one when it comes to kids, isn't it?
It's a massive one. Yeah. And I'm trying to dispel the myth and the label that is, I think, incorrectly given to some children. So whilst you might have a percentage of kids that are very fussy and very picky, it's out of choice, you know. And they're the kids you can actually trick. You know, they're the ones that if you make a homemade McDonald's and put it in a McDonald's box, it'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll eat it because it's got the label.
But you cannot do that with a neurodivergent kid that is sensory sensitive because they will smell that a mile off. They don't. You can tell by look.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, I think, from a parental point of view, how many people my content's helping. However, there'll always be that small minority of trolls and kind of people that are like, oh, you're not autistic. Look at you. Like, as if autism has a look, you know?
That's so stereotypical.
It really is. But unfortunately, we're on effectively a learning journey. Everyone's on a learning journey. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago, do I think I'm autistic? You know, I would have been offended. I was at the point where my neighbour suggested it. So, yeah, here we are.
Have you thanked them now?
Exactly.
What message are you trying to get across for using your socials, using like from turning your cooking in the kitchen on your own to an actual channel and reaching out to people? What message are you trying to portray?
Actually, just a really neuro-affirming one. So whatever your neurotype, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, just be yourself and actually own your authentic self. And actually, it's okay to be you. I think that's my main message because I've gone 3.5 decades of my life pretending to be what society expected of me. Yeah. It is exhausting. So yeah, owning yourself is the main one, I think.
Something I should have said earlier. If for those that don't know what neurodiverse is.
Everybody is neurodiverse. So neurodiverse encompasses all neurotypes, but neurodivergent is when you deviate from that neurotype that is typical. So if you are neurodivergent, which I am, I have autism, I have ADHD, I have sensory processing that I know of. I'm sure there's loads of other Pokemons I can collect, but at this stage, I've only had the diagnosis for the 3, but it can encompass many other different conditions or traits, OCD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. I could go on.
Yeah. The main thing I want to ask you about, from a personal reason, MasterChef.
Yeah.
What made you decide that you wanted to enter?
Do you know what? Receiving that diagnosis, it was part of my journey of unmasking and finding my authentic self and actually pulling back to why I love cooking. And the reason why I love cooking is because it gives me that control. And it was like, MasterChef has been such a special interest for so long for me. Like, there had never been a series I hadn't watched to the point where I've rewatched it so many times. I can tell you what's happening at any point. I can tell you the feedback and tell you everything. So I just thought it's now or never. And I'm so glad. I was very privileged to be able to be on there for the first attempt because there'd been some people that had applied for many years in a row and never got on. So yeah, very, very happy.
How does the process work? Do you have to go through like a lot of cooking, tasting before you get to the first round? Or?
Yeah, it's a really weird process because there's a lot of admin involved. So there's like a very extensive application which you fill out. And I guess that's their first vetting process. But I mean, it's like life story, explaining what your influences are, your experiences, like everything. And then there was a telephone interview, an in-person interview where you actually don't cook in front of them. You have to take food from home, which I think complicates it even more. But I guess they just want to see in the moment how you plate up and can talk, because actually a lot of it isn't just about cooking, because a lot of people can cook in their own environment, but can you cook in a different environment, and can you cook and talk and explain about what you're doing when a camera's in your face and somebody's talking to you? And I found that quite hard, but I just learned how to kind of be myself, and whatever you get is whatever you get. And that's part of, I guess, me trying to be my authentic self, because there's a lot of people that will go on there and whether you're neurodivergent or not, you would highly mask.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's whatever you want the world to perceive, because the world is watching that.
Yeah, everybody watching that.
After that, eventually got on it, and then it's battle of the best, basically, from 45 people down to, I think I got to final 6.
That's impressive.
In the semi-finals. But I was ready to go at that point. I was about to have a nervous breakdown, and I was like, if I don't get chucked out at this point, I'll probably leave.
I imagine it's quite a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for anyone, but if you are neurodivergent, it's even harder. So my autism makes me need to know what I'm doing, where I'm going at every stage.
Yeah.
And actually, forget the cooking, forget the filming. It's just the other bits, like not knowing when you're going to have lunch, not knowing when you're going to start to actually cook. And it's that anxiety. It's also, from a sensory point of view, dealing with light, sound, a microphone pack, you know, all of these things that you typically wouldn't have to deal with. And then your mind goes wandering into strange places where I'm so jealous of, like, the other contestants, because they just go in there and they're like, oh, I'm a bit nervous. I was like, is that all you're thinking? There are so many things going on in my mind. And the moment I try to vocalise it, they're like, wow.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking,
come from?
You know, the lights, the sound. I'm also worried and questioning how much the sound man can hear when you go to the toilet, when you do all these things, and you're like, they don't switch off the microphone pack. You know, all of these thoughts that swim around, plus you're in your head thinking about your dish. And for me, as a very visual person, I'm thinking, that's going on that hob, then next step is this, this and this. Then you've got all your notes. And other people just go in and they're like, just going to like wing
blasé
it.
about it, aren't they? They're just, I'll do this, I'll do this.
I wish my life could be like that. But then I'm also having to rehearse conversations, because I don't deal with like talking off cuff very well, you know? So I kind of need some structure, but they don't do that when they're filming MasterChef. It's like whatever we ask you is whatever we ask you. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's preparing for all that. Plus you're very nervous.
How was it with the other contestants? Did you get on really well? Was it like obviously it looks like everyone gets on really well in the whole thing. But I
mean, it's a hit and miss situation, because obviously you've got so many different personalities at the very beginning as well. Yeah. There's potentially, in your heat, I think we had 9 people. So you start off, and people don't realise how intense a day is. Like I've watched MasterChef for 20 odd years, and you think, how long does it take to film an episode for, like, they cook once, can't be that difficult, the cook is an hour. But actually you don't realise that day starts at 7 a.m. and you don't finish till 7 p.m. That's a long time to spend.
Are you waiting for everyone else to cook as well, because they do it in stages, don't they?
Yes, but it's also like, even the walking shot down the canal, you're doing like for an hour. Yeah. Come rain or shine, you are walking back and forth, trying not to look at the ground, trying not to look at the camera, back and forth, and that can take a long time, and that's just irrelevant. That's like a 15-second shot. Yeah. And then there's the cooking, then there's the deliberating, then there's all the bits in between, like the interview, the post, and the pre-interviews, and it just takes a long time. Plus, I think producers obviously like to build up suspense, so it's like, let's leave them stewing for a little bit, especially after an incident, just to see how much we can get from this. So yeah, I think it's a long time to spend, and obviously the further you get into the competition. So I left in the semi-finals, and I started filming in September, and I finished at the end of November. So if you got to the finals, that is like a good 4 months of filming.
Is it filming like every day or once a week? Or
4 days a week. Wow. Yeah, apart from obviously when your heat's not on, but after you get past the heats, it's every day until you get knocked out.
That's intense.
Yeah.
What was your favourite part?
The restaurant experience, mainly because it's kind of an experience that money would never like get you.
You can't just...
You know, like, am I going to quit my job at TNT Sports to see if I could like hack it in that environment for a day? It's quite obvious I couldn't.
No.
But did I enjoy it? Yes. So it gave me such an insight, and it gives you the responsibility that I guess if you were to try and start a career in hospitality, you'd never be able to do. Like, I would never be trusted with a main meal at a fancy restaurant on my own.
On your own, yeah.
Yeah.
So you work with the other chefs, don't you, that are already there in that situation?
You'd think so, but you kind of don't.
Do they
And
just
part
leave
of
you to
that
it?
is production value, right? So actually the only way you get shown that meal is with the demo that they use for the filming.
Yeah.
So it's
So
like,
you'd get one
surely when the camera's off, like, he can go through that 4 times. No one's going to waste ingredients on showing Vanessa how to do this dish 4 times. Like, it's expensive.
Yeah.
So, I think that was quite a humbling experience.
It's a lot to remember as well, especially when you're under pressure and everything. You've got to try and remember that goes in first and then do this, especially when they do so many, what is it, like 20 seatings or something?
Well, yeah, it was quite, I think my covers, I was told to prepare like 20, but then suddenly I ended up preparing 26. So I don't know what kind of wizardry went on there. But
6 too many.
Yeah, they like to slam in. They gave me the one that was the most. It was a taco, so it sounds easy, but actually it requires so many different elements.
So many different
but
sections
then to be plated at the last minute. So I would have actually probably preferred the stuff that required more prep.
Yeah.
But then left you not stressed in the moment when you have 6 tacos in one and then 10 backed up.
Yeah. It's a lot to take on.
It is, yeah.
But like you said, I imagine it's quite fun to see it from that. Maybe not fun, but...
I mean, it was an adrenaline rush for sure.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't know how people in hospitality do this day in, day out and still have hair and still have their life together.
That's what I was going to say. Did you because obviously you said you didn't really work with chefs, but you obviously saw what they were doing and stuff and how... Yeah. It's a whole other world, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you get used to it. I guess time will tell. But I personally found that to be quite stressful and also disorientating because it's very long hours and those schedules can change.
Chefs is a huge thing at the moment in the industry, like trying to get people back into being chefs. And you can see why. You can, because it is long hours, it's hard work.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really rewarding thing. So, people are out there eating your food that you've spent hours, you've designed the menu, you've spent hours prepping it, and it must be quite rewarding in that fact. But yeah, I
guess if they like it.
You'd hope they liked it if they were choosing it. But
I'd hate to be a chef when you get, rejected dishes back and you're just like, but was it worth that rejection or is it just your opinion? And that's where I think it gets really, can be offensive.
The fine balance.
Yeah.
You've mentioned it a few times. Can you explain in a bit more detail what masking is?
Good question. One that I probably wasn't prepared for. So it's a very wing it approach. But a mask for me, or my mask, would be presenting myself as what society needs me to be in that moment. To give you real life examples, it's going to an office 9 to 5 and smiling and being perceived as, wow, she's that bubbly girl, we love working with her, when really I'm dying inside because the lights are burning my soul. I can't deal with all the conversations that's happening inside. I have to strategize, dealing with that desk is not mine, but I have to make it mine because I need the same desk at the same place every time I go in. It's trying to continuously stop yourself from having meltdowns. So going to the toilet and spending half your time in the toilet. That's what masking is for me. And it's really when the mask comes off and actually all the work that it takes when I go home to recover from the show and tell, and that could be from a Friday to a Sunday, not leaving the house and not talking to anyone.
I was going to say, how do you deal with it once you've taken the mask off as such?
To be honest, I don't think I do deal with it. And actually, part of my diagnosis is not actually suddenly you're given these tools to be like, oh, I can handle this. Actually, it's about learning more about yourself to know that I know my social battery is like this when most people's is like this. Yeah. And so for me, it's about adapting my life. So now I go to an office 1 day a week. Not the mandatory 3 or 5 that it was, God forbid, pre-COVID. But it's about making those adaptions for a party, for example, and saying, yes, I will come, but I will do a 1 hour stint right at the beginning.
I'll be there before lots of people are there.
Yeah. And you'll find me in the kitchen in the safe spot.
Yeah, I'll be in the same place every time.
Exactly.
I get that though. I've recently did the thing, if I'm like really overworked, I'll sit in my living room in the dark and I'll listen to like fire noises or sea noises, like just something to like clear my head.
Yeah.
And it's so it's really rewarding, especially when you've got your own space. Like,
it's amazing. It's not dissimilar to what I do from a Friday to a Sunday to recover. I'll sit under a weighted blanket. The big light will never be on.
No.
Right?
All my little lights.
Yeah, exactly. Only little lights or fairy lights. And yeah, it might be doom scrolling on the internet. It might be rewatching the same stuff. I'm a bit sad actually because MasterChef was my safe show and I haven't actually been able to watch it again in the same way.
You watched your episodes?
I did when it was on TV, obviously. I haven't watched it since.
It must be quite like I'm watching these podcasts back. I'm a bit like, oh, that's me. Like it's a bit of a weird reality thing.
I don't want to say it's ruined it for me, but it kind of has ruined now when I watch MasterChef, even with other people
because you know what goes on behind the scenes and stuff.
Yeah.
So pubs, what's your opinion on pubs?
Love them. They don't love me though.
Do you go to many? Or like, how do you find the pub experience?
Wonderful. It's one of those, like, I'm just a little bit sad because obviously pubs are struggling, more are closing down, and it's like, how do we champion that and keep the spirit alive? But yeah, pubs are cosy. I love the ones with the fireplaces. Yeah. It sounds horrible, but I live in Croydon. I love Croydon, but you're on the doorstep of, you can be in London within sort of 10 minutes, but you can also be in a country pub in 10 minutes the other way. And so I feel like I have the best of both because I've got like the country ones, but I also have the cool London ones as well.
Yeah. So the whole idea of the workforce platform is to try and build up that perspective that pubs they're fun.
Yeah.
You can social in them, you could use them for work, you can use them for socials, you could go on a date there, you could take your family out for a 60th birthday. But also working in the trade, it's not just I'm just filling in some hours while I'm at uni job. It can be a career.
Of course.
And I think that that's what we really want to showcase to people, that it is so important. But like even you saying that going into a pub is important. Like obviously part of my job is to do with pubs, but just visiting a pub at a weekend and just chilling with my friends, I'd much rather do that than go into a club. Not that I'm like bad mouthing clubs, but obviously they're not your.
I mean, as somebody that is very sensory sensitive, I prefer to sit in a pub because of the noise levels and also the coziness and everything. It feels more comforting to me than sitting in a very noisy bar. And actually, you mentioned dates and things. One of the hardest things for me was dating because people naturally always pick a bar. Yeah. And I'm like, why? And I think something needs to shift, and actually pubs need to be more championed in every situation, including dating.
Oh yeah, completely agree.
Yeah.
If you go, oh, do you want to grab a drink? I'm like, but do I drink on this date?
Yeah.
Do I do this? Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
I need a nice quiet pub that's not too quiet that everyone can hear the fact they're on a first date.
100%. And also, I don't know whether it's an age thing, but like, I don't go anywhere now unless I know I've got a seat. Like, I want a seat.
I know, I get that.
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone that they're looking at starting a career in a pub, but obviously they're in that situation where they're not sure? What tips would you give? Like top 3 tips for someone that's thinking, do I need to get a diagnosis?
It's really down to the individual because there are a lot of chefs with ADHD, and actually that's their biggest strength because they can multitask so much. Yeah. And actually somebody with ADHD, very inattentive ADHD, will love the fact that their routine is not the same. They would love the fact that they might be working nights on a Thursday, days on a Friday. Yeah. But for somebody with autism, might not work so well. And it's really about finding the right environment for that individual. So, part of what I would love to do is train people in hospitality on how best to work with your staff and actually your customers. Because as somebody that is neurodivergent, I find going to a restaurant quite stressful sometimes. And just being able to equip, I guess, people in hospitality with just key pieces of information to say, is there somewhere quieter we could place you? Also the small things where you go into a restaurant and sometimes somebody says, pick any table. No, I've got decision paralysis. Like, now I'm stuck between 5 tables, whereas actually maybe if you just pick for me, that would have caused me less stress.
Yes, you're already stressed before you sat down.
Yeah. And I so want to champion, like, just the small things, like having a menu online. because I will never go to a place that doesn't have a menu that I can look at
Always
beforehand.
checking out the menu before I go somewhere.
You have
Always.
to.
Yeah. So then you've got in your head, you make a couple of choices to see what they've got in the day. Yeah.
I need to know if there's like foods on there that I would eat.
Yeah.
So yeah, small things like that.
How do you? I know you said you're very sensory with your food.
Yeah.
If someone brings you out food, and for example, it is a curry.
Yeah.
And the rice is touching the curry,
Yeah.
how does that set? Have you learned to deal with that, or does it sit is your head inside your head going?
So pre-diagnosis, I would just hide all those traits. So technically, I probably wouldn't order a rice and curry on a menu because I know how that's going to be. But I would be perceived by other people as, wow, she's such a diva. Because I'd say, I don't want this, I don't want that. Because, a simple thing like a roast can cause me a lot of stress because often it comes with, a pub is not going to have to pick 50 gravy jugs. They'll put the gravy on and not have to worry about it. That is awful for me. I love a roast, but I want to be in control of making my food wet when I want it wet. So it's kind of like I would just say no gravy. And then people will think, you're so weird. How are you having a dry roast? But actually, if you ask for gravy afterwards, you find that they give it to you in a jug on the side. So you find ways to adapt and make it not look sort of out of the blue. But now, trying to be my authentic self, I actually am trying to learn in situations to be more courageous and say, I have the sticky toffee pudding. Can I have the sauce and the ice cream separately? I don't want all of that bleeding in.
Yeah. How many people look at you and go, what?
Weirdly, not many. And I think the first thing they think of is allergies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and then they get really panicked because they're like, are you allergic? Because, the starter you've ordered has dairy in it. And it's like, I'm not allergic. I'm just really... And this is where people only relate when you use the word fussy. And I actually need to train myself to say, actually, it's okay to say I'm autistic and actually I don't like my ice cream. And this is where, as a chef, a lot of chefs will have backlash because they're like, I designed the menu to be like this.
Yeah.
And I want to serve it like this. And I respect that. And there's been situations, actually, where in restaurants where they're like, okay, this is not catering for a kid, so actually we're not going to do it. Yeah. There's lots of other things on the menu you can have.
Yeah.
And I respect that.
I get that. And I remember during MasterChef you were saying deconstructed food.
Yeah.
It's the way forward for your brain.
For me, yeah. It's just putting the control with the person eating it. And it's so fascinating to me when I see my husband, for example, he just mixes everything together. Yeah. And he's very much off the attitude of, well, it's all going to end up in my belly anyway.
Which I sort of get, yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could I could do that. Whereas for me, everything needs to be cut evenly just for a safer sensory experience. And so I go mental when tomatoes in a salad aren't cut evenly. You can't have one person having a massive chunk and another person having nothing. It's just, it's weird.
How does your husband, obviously he's probably really supportive and stuff, how does he cope? Does he get frustrated if you're like, no, that tomato is not cut in half?
I mean, I think we fight, I guess with any marriage, right? Yeah. You're always going to have differences. It works for us sometimes because, he's also neurodivergent. He has very inattentive ADHD, which is interesting because that really clashes with my autism. Yeah. But in some situations, like when we go to a pub or a restaurant, it works really well because we'll pick a table where he'll look out and be able to see everything.
Yep.
And I'll be facing the wall. And it really works for us. But in situations at home, I've kind of learned it's best. And also, it tastes best when I cook and he doesn't because he's not the best cook.
It's practice for you anyway.
Exactly. So, we find ways around it. And actually, it's a learning journey for both of us. And we'll still be learning, I'm sure, in 5 years' time.
It's probably nice to have someone to do that with as well.
Yeah.
And support you.
Yeah.
With you mentioned that the ADHD for some of the chefs is like a superpower.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really good way of putting it because I think there's so, obviously, like we said, 5 years ago, there was so much bad stigma and stuff about the autism and stuff. But now it's such a talked about thing. Yeah. People are really open about it. And I think superpower is a great way of looking at it.
I'm mindful of using the word superpower because as great as some attributes can be, I don't want to diminish the struggles that come with it.
Oh, yeah,
but it definitely can be a positive. And I know, like, Loyal Kana, for example, the rapper, he's also from Croydon, he uses food as his hyperfocus to control his ADHD tendencies. And like, it makes him such a good cook. And I love that he started up like a little cooking school to help those with ADHD. And, you know, if you end up using cooking as your hyperfocus, it can be incredible and you will be the best chef. But it's, if you don't learn how to channel that, or if you're working in any industry, right? It could be hospitality, it could be not, but it's something that you can't hyper-focus on, you're always going to fail.
When you say hyper-focus, explain that in...
So, I guess for me, it's very self-explanatory. It does what it says on the tin, right? Yeah. It's a focus that is so fixated. And for me, mine is food, right? Yeah. And whether you want to call that a special interest or a hyper-focus, when I commit to that, my ADHD brain will commit to it and see it through until the point where that is boring to me. And so it's about finding it's about finding that dopamine, right? And it's whatever gives your brain the most dopamine, and cooking really does that because so many variables are changing at once. So it's quite difficult to get bored when cooking because there's so many different avenues, and actually if things go wrong, you can always make something else out of it. Whereas maybe like for autistic people where change is not easy, it's not always great. Also, if you are structured, it is great because there's always a process you can follow. It's really down to the individual, to be honest.
So I guess like I paint. My hyperfocus is probably painting or drawing.
That's cool.
Because it keeps me, like, my brain focused for ages, and you can always change and stuff, so that would probably be mine, not cooking.
That's
I can
amazing.
cook, but not...
It's still creative, right?
Yeah. It's a creative thing, isn't it? It's something that can focus your brain and...
Amazing.
Yeah. Most of the time. Some of the times I'm like, oh... There's a lot of half-finished products in my house.
Yeah. I mean, I go through things like, it's what they call ADHD tax as well, isn't it? Where you just, like, spend loads of money on stuff, like a new hobby, and then, well... it's out the window after 5 minutes.
Nope, that didn't work. That didn't go according to plan. I'll be out the window. I suppose the difference is with art, I can just leave it, whereas cooking, you can't really just walk away halfway through.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's a lot of wasted ingredients in my house, and sometimes you can feel like you want to make something and prepare for it, and then actually you don't fancy that on the day, and then that just goes to waste because my brain is very black and white, and it's like, well, if I'm not having that, I can't make something else from it because it was only for that.
One thing we've spoken about in previous podcasts and things is that the hospitality industry is really good for building your personality.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned it before a few times that I was shy, sweet, innocent, and wouldn't say boo to a goose.
Yeah.
Now completely different, but I've worked in hospitality for ages. Why do you think it's so important that it allows you to, like, being allowed to build your personality?
Yeah, I think hospitality is one of the very few industries that we have out there where you can be yourself, right? So usually you can wear what you want. You are accepted with being your authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, with an ever-changing environment, it's the best to just be you. Whereas you could probably never do that in an office. You have to conform in some way, shape or form. So I think actually hospitality is one of the only sort of really flexible environments you can do that in.
One thing that we've done in our podcast is that the person before you has written a question.
Nice.
So we are going to get you to read the question out and then answer it, and then we will get you to write one for the next person.
Okay, cool.
If you could choose one role in hospitality industry for the rest of your working life, what would it be? So if you could work in one role in hospitality, what would it be?
It'd definitely be something back of house for sure.
See, I would say front of house. I love working behind the bar.
Oh, but people.
It's challenging, for you.
Yeah. People. I mean, it has to be something in cooking, and it'll probably be something that oversees things as opposed to is doing. So maybe like a head chef over a sous chef, because I love it. Part of that will be like ordering, designing the menu, creating the menu, but then not physically having to do that in that moment because I get very overwhelmed. So yeah, probably head chef.
Head chef. Yeah. We're aiming for that. What's next up? What's happening with you this year? What's coming this year?
Oh, lots in the pipeline this year. I want to champion as much as I can in the neurodivergent space. So lots of things, some collaborations, even in the hospitality industry, to kind of help champion how you can work better with your sort of neurodivergent staff, how you can support them, how you can support your customers. And then, just as much raising awareness and championing acceptance as possible.
Perfect. And I'm sure we will see a lot more of you in Workforce and the BRA, which will be very, very exciting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.